What does masculinity mean? There are lots of stereotypes when it comes to masculinity, especially in regards to sport. But what if they're too limiting? In George Napier, Napier explores his journey to becoming one of New Zealand rugby's earliest stars. He played rugby union and rugby league for New Zealand and took part in the 1924 to 25 Invincibles tour, where the All Blacks went unbeaten against England, Canada, France, and Ireland. Published in 1963, the book documents his journey and everything that shaped him. So, how did Napier become the man and player that he was? There isn't one definitive answer, but the three things that stood out to me were the tough context of his upbringing, his inclination for enjoyment, and also, surprisingly, his capacity to express emotion. Let's get into it. Napier didn't have it easy growing up. On page 5, he literally says, "I do not look back with joy on my life as a child." Oof. He also describes a complicated relationship with his father, who was a dairy farmer who did not spare the rod. So Napier certainly wasn't cushioned from the harsh realities of life. He also lived through 2 world wars and would eventually lose his own son to battle. This was the grim context that impacted George Napier. They say tough times create strong men, and without a doubt, Napier was a strong man, but he didn't let that strength harden into bitterness. Quite the opposite, actually. On page 163, somebody describes him as a man of great humility with a twinkling sense of humour. And this sense of humour is demonstrated in what I'm going to call the horse incident. This is page 81. There's a certain post-match meal. Napier says, "I was so hungry I could have eaten a horse. I did too, and enjoyed it." And at first I thought he was joking, but then he goes on to describe that the team was eating the meal and the meat was a bit strange, and they eventually found out that it was horse meat. At this point, a lot of the teammates got up and left. But George's response was comical. He says, "Not me. It was food. Good food as far as I was concerned. I announced that horse or no horse, I was for it." He's grounded, funny, and he didn't let toughness stop him from enjoying life. And his enjoyment is what we're going to go into next. So despite the grim backdrop of the early 1900s, Napier constantly enjoyed his rugby. He had high standards for himself, but he made sure to enjoy the journey. On page 25, he says, "I was eating, drinking, and most certainly dreaming rugby." And then on page 41, he says, "We amuse ourselves on the one hand and train as diligently as we can on the other." So there was no separation between development and enjoyment. On page 42, he says, "This is trust. When you build this among men, you build such a wall that nothing will ever knock it down." So he loved his teammates, he loved playing rugby, and he just loved the whole environment around it. He said on page 85, "We grew as a group to love one another." So just lots of enjoyment. He realised that growth and enjoyment would come hand in hand when it came to rugby. And I think this enjoyment likely contributed to keeping him in the game longer. He didn't play his last game of rugby until the age of 42. So he enjoyed it deeply and expressed his emotions about it freely. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So one of the things that surprised me the most about this book actually was how emotionally open he is. On page 33, he says, "What a game life can play with you." And it's just so emphatic. And I'm not sure if this is personal or cultural or just a product of the historical context at the time, but it's just shown throughout the book. Page 48, he says, "I used to lie awake at night, fretting over my mistakes. And then on page 65, he says, I'm sorry if I become a little emotional about this match. It was significant for New Zealand. It was significant for me. He just says everything with such honesty. And then there's one point where one of his teammates gets sent off in a game. And his description was particularly interesting. He says, he's a big, powerful, mature man, yet the tears are rolling down his cheeks. So perhaps it wasn't just George. Perhaps there were some cultural forces at play here. Either way, Napier demonstrates that softness and strength can coexist. You can be formidable and still have feelings. So, in conclusion, George Napier's biography is definitely one to write home about. He explores the heights of elite sport, especially with a tough context, shows that an inclination for enjoyment makes the journey more enriching, and also demonstrates the freedom to express emotion along the way. Ultimately, Napier shows that integrated masculinity is the ability to experience the full range of human emotion on and off the pitch.